I don't know how many of you get the Waldron newsletter. It's actually mailed to the church, and it's mailed to our house. And I was reading the one that we got in January, and as Mark Meadows always says, that'll preach. Well, I don't preach, so I thought this would teach. Basically, if the January 2022 basically starts with the war to destroy Christian America. And Jim Waldron is part of the Waldron Mission Fund. We support Jim. Jim's been here several times and he's spoken. But he writes, this is The War to Destroy Christian America, written by David Horowitz. And it says, a famed Jewish author is warning, Christians are in danger. He says they are targeted by secular leftists. They want to destroy Christianity in America. Persecution against Christians is already happening. It can get far worse. David Horowitz exposes the truth in the new bestseller, Dark Agenda. He says, Christianity, once the backbone of American civilization, Judeo-Christian society, is under cruel and relentless attack. And it talks about what he does, but he's a conservative commentator and New York Times bestseller. But he says their goal is to destroy Christianity in America. Sounds unbelievable. Think again, Dark Agenda, again, his book. He basically says that the left's calculated efforts to create a godless, heathen American society, he says such efforts must be stopped. He argues that even Jews and anyone who believes in God will be in danger if Christians are not protected. Already some extreme fringe groups are resorting to horrific violence to kill innocent, God-fearing worshipers, sometimes in their own churches. His Dark Agenda shows how liberals and their radical allies envision a new millennium in which Christianity is banished. So it goes on, it talks about other things, talks about some other political, I don't want to get into that, but and then Jim makes a comment that basically, he's written a book about it, but he says that we need to pay attention. And so what I wanted to, basically as we start class this morning, what I wanted to kind of talk about is what is our responsibilities. Christianity is the most prevalent religion in the U.S. today. Estimates suggest between 65 to 75% of the U.S. population is Christian. That's about 250 million. The majority are Protestant Christians, 150 to 160 million, and Roman Catholics, 70 to 75, and then other minorities. But the point I wanted to make with, we are a majority. Now when I say Christianity, I say that in quotes, but if Christianity is the majority, how do we get to the point where we are today, where there's books written, there's a lot of people who believe that there is a group who's trying to wipe out Christianity. Do you see that in our world today? Like Tim says, do this, shake your head. If you watch local news, national news, what's the general topic? Is it Christianity is good? Visit the church of your choice? No, it's not, is it? I mean, it's the world we live in today, the society that we live in, it's basically controlled by Satan. And but my point of the numbers is Christianity is if we're a minority, then why have we gotten into the point where we've gotten into in the world that we live in? I mean, think about our politics, and I don't want to get into that because that would take the whole time. But just as a point, I think that we need to look at our responsibilities as Christians, and what I want to what the actual class today is, we'll talk about the parable of the talents. So if you go to Matthew chapter 25, Matthew 25 starts with the 10 virgins. And we're not going to spend time with that, but and then in verse 14 of Matthew 25, after it talks about the parable of the virgins and the foolish virgins, what's the point of that parable? Be prepared, be ready. So the parable of the virgins basically gives us a lesson that we need to be prepared. We need to be ready. And then verse 14 starts with for. So it kind of continues the thought. For the kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country, who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. And to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, to each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on a journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them, and made another 5 talents. And likewise he who had received 2 gained 2 more also. But he who received 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of the servants came and settled accounts with them. So he had received 5 talents, came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He also, who had received 2 talents, came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I have gained 2 more talents besides them. His Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Then he had received the 1 talent, came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you had not sown, and gathering where you had not scattered seed. And I was afraid, and went and hid your talents in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours. Now before we go on, what did the third servant really do? Was it that bad? Paula says he just didn't go out and do more, get more. Did he waste the money gambling? Did he make bad investments? I mean, when you think about what he did, he just did nothing. Exactly. So what's wrong with just doing nothing? Yeah, he didn't use what God gave him. But can we say, when we look at what David Horowitz writes about America and Christianity, we talk about the statistics of Christianity is a majority. Are Christians doing nothing? I mean, is that what we're doing? Look where we are today. Who's happy with America today as a Christian? Who can say, I'm proud of America? I mean, I'm proud to be American because of what we stand for and what we do and all the things that has happened in the past. But where we are right now, it's kind of hard to say that, isn't it? When we don't know what bathroom to go to. I was at a restaurant, I don't even remember where I was, but I go to the bathroom, there's 2 doors. I'm looking for the man or the woman, and it says neutral gender. I'm like, what's that mean? So I chose one. But I mean, what have we done? So when you think about that third servant, I mean, he really wasn't, well, we know what he is, but he didn't waste it, he didn't gamble it, but he didn't do anything, which is, he didn't use what God gave us, what he gave him. But so we'll continue on, verse 26. But the Lord answered and said to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But for him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what I wanted to do was take this parable, this lesson that Jesus gives us, and try to apply it to our lives today. And we could talk about talents, and I don't want to do that, what it really was, whether it's pounds or, but what I want us to look at is think of it as opportunities. That we all have opportunities in our lives. And it's hard to do now, but if you think about the last week, from last Sunday to today, and your encounters with the people in the world, how many opportunities did you have as a Christian to let our light shine? Because we have opportunities every day. It's what we do with those opportunities. People will still accept the word of Jesus, but it has to be taken to them. we have streaming. So we hope, obviously, it's for members, but we also hope that someone is just looking for something on Facebook or wherever, and they might find us, and we might spark their interest. They might come, and then we can teach them about Jesus. So we have opportunities as Christians. So some points that we'll make from this parable, and you can add to it if you at any point have questions. But we're stewards. What is a steward? If you're a steward, what does that mean? A caretaker. So Mark owns a company. He leaves town. Does he have stewards to take care of that company? Yeah, he has to. If he came back and he found that all the servants were like the last servant, Mark wouldn't have a company any longer, would he? So he has to have confidence and trust. And one point about the master, did he not know his servants? Yeah, he knew his servants because he gave talents based on their ability. Can you imagine so let's say the servants are gathered there and the master, let's just say it's me and my 3 kids. And I say to Amanda, here, Amanda, there's $10, go do something with it. And I say to Brian, here's $5, go do something with it. Here, Kevin, here's $1. What's Kevin going to do? What? I get $1? You give them 5 and 10? Do you think this servant did that? Do you think this servant, with what we know about him, do you think he copped an attitude? I'll show him. I'll bury that money. Do you think he had an attitude like that? Do you know anybody like that? In this parable, Jesus is the master, and we're the servants. And we have the word. We have opportunity. So what you have to think about is, what's God given me? How many talents has he given me? Am I using those talents? Am I a 5-talent guy, gal? Not to be sexist, so am I a 5-talent person? Am I a 2-talent, 3-talent, 1 talent? But it doesn't matter where we are, because God expects to return on whatever that he's given us. So we have the parable of the 10 virgins, which basically tells us to be ready at all times. And then this parable is about accountability, because there will be a judgment. There will be an accountability, a time where we are all gone to the master. And he says, Don, I gave you this many talents. What did you do with them? Now, Mark can't speak up for Don. What's Don got to do? He's got to answer for himself, right? That's what we're all going to have to do. And it's not a matter of blaming or doing something against someone else. So when we look at one of the lessons of the parable of the talents is the ability plus opportunity equals responsibility. So when you think about that, the ability plus opportunity equals responsibility. So do we all, think about it, do we all have a responsibility as Christians to do something with our light? Again, all of us should be doing this because, yes, we all have a responsibility to do something with the opportunity that's put before us. If we're Christians, if we've accepted that, then basically God has given us opportunities to do something. If someone will turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 8, or flip to in your phone, whichever. If somebody will go to Galatians chapter 6, 7 through 10. If someone will turn to Colossians 4, verse 5, and then Ephesians 5, 15 through 17. Okay, 1 Corinthians 3, 8. Who has that? Read a little louder. A little louder, please. Go ahead, Tim. You got it? Oh, you got it. Which one? You got the last one? Okay, I got you for the last one. You go ahead and read the last one while someone else gets that. So Ephesians 5, 15 through 17. Go ahead.
See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Wherefore, be ye not unwise, but understanding what the will of the Lord is.
Okay. Anyone have Colossians 4:5? 1 Corinthians 3:8. You got that? Okay. Don's going to read 1 Corinthians 3:8.
Now he that planteth and he that watereth are one, and every man receive his own reward according to his own labor.
Okay. What's that last part again? Say it again.
Every man shall receive his own reward according to his own labor.
Okay. So that tells us that everyone's going to receive their own reward based on their own labor. Okay. Galatians 6. Benita?
Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth in the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith.
Okay. And the last one, Colossians 4:5. All right, Paula? Colossians 4:5.
Walk in wisdom with those who are outside the meaning of time. Let your speech always be with grace, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to speak.
Okay. So basically, I think when we one of the lessons that we learn from this parable is that the accountability that we have, and the verses that we read kind of talk about that we are going to sow what we reap, and that we're going to be accountable, but we do have some abilities. And then just a free one that I'm going to add is James 5, verse 20. Eric, if you'll read that, I won't just do it. So James 5, verse 20. Just the one verse. Unless you feel like reading, I'll let you read the whole chapter, take up time. But it's James 5:20. It's in the New Testament, Eric. Thanks, Lisa. Oh, okay. Read it, Lisa. Or Kyle. All right. 5 verse 20.
Let it know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wanderings will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude.
Okay. You know, that verse, I think when we think about where we are as a church, a family here at Alkire Road, I think there are enough of us who know plenty of family and friends who have fallen astray. And when we think about opportunities, and you think about that verse kind of dangles a carrot out there for us if we bring someone back. It covers a multitude of sins. So we have opportunities as Christians, and it's what we do with those opportunities is what we are going to be judged on accordingly. Any Sure. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. And Don says that he thinks, adding to that point, that when we think about the Luke 15, where we kind of started class, that when we talk about the lost sheep, the shepherd left the 99 to find the one lost. And so when we think about, if we go back to 1980 at Alkire Road and we take the church picture directory, which would be a scary thing, but if we did that, we would see a lot of people who just don't go to church anymore. And can't tell you why. But so there is a point to bringing back those who are lost. Not only seeking the lost, but bringing back those who are lost. Another point is having a small ability gives us excuses. We can't use that as an excuse because what you think is a small ability. Second, the parable of talents shows us that we do not have identical opportunities or talents. Each steward was entrusted with unequal amounts of money, abilities, talents, according to his ability. All are entrusted with something, but each receives a different amount. In our age of equality, we are tempted to begrudge the varying degrees of allocated and opportunity that we see. We sometimes want to compare ourselves with our talents. Yet we must remember two things. We're responsible for what we have, and we're able to work with what we have. So when you think about abilities, if we use that as a talent, I love to play basketball. But if you look at me, what's my limitations? Go ahead, say it. I'm short. Yeah, I'm short. So the chances of me doing a lot with basketball are slim and nil. So it doesn't mean that I can't still do it and enjoy it, but if I was talking about my ability to earn a living, basketball's not it. Not going to happen. My dad always told me when I was little, stick with baseball, Ned. Size doesn't matter. But I love basketball, so I would play basketball. But so we all have ability. Some of it's more limited than others, but we have to do something with it. It tells us in verse 19, after a long time, the master of those servants returned. What do you think that refers to, his return? Christ coming back. There will be a judgment. At some point, just as these servants are called before their master, we are going to be called before our master, and then we'll give an account. The one-talent man was not given too little to accomplish his faithfulness towards the master. He was given more than enough to meet the master's expectations. Likewise, whatever we possess is sufficient enough to produce an increase for our God. But if we always take our effort of faith to achieve that, but it will always take our effort of faith to achieve that increase. The next point of the talent teaches us that our success is contingent upon our work and effort of faith. Is anyone given a golden ticket to heaven as Christians? So Tim, because he's a preacher, does that give Jim more because his dad's a preacher? No, he doesn't get special seats or special treatment, or doesn't get any extra accolades because he's a preacher's son. He probably got worse because he was a preacher's son. But there's no golden parachutes. There's nothing that gives us any more credit than our ability, our work, and our efforts that we put in. And that's where faith comes in, because we have to have faith to apply the things that we have. Regardless of whether we are reading this parable for the first or the 51st time, the conclusion is unmistakable. We are personally held responsible for our lives to God. So that shows us that. Christians are to be workers in the kingdom. The talents represent special gifts that's given to us. What gifts are given to us as Christians? Do all of us interact with the world in some way, shape, or form? I guess today, you could probably sit at home on your computer and have food brought in, have groceries brought in. You probably could limit, I guess with COVID we learned how to do that, but you could limit your access to the outside world. But as Christians, is that what we want to do? No, we don't want to do that. I know we have business cards, and I know Sue talked about that. Whenever she would mail a check, she would put our card in there with it. Now, maybe it got thrown away, but maybe one person read that and kept that. We mail out house to house to the surrounding area. Maybe sometime, because there's people who get this in January, and you know what they probably did with it? What they do with junk mail. But is this junk mail? It's not. But if someone read that, if someone took our house to house that goes out and they read it and they think, that's interesting. Maybe they think whatever is the topic of that quarter when we send those out, maybe that will spur on their interest to check out Alkire Road. And they can go to our website and they can see sermons and they can see lessons and they can see what we're about. But we have talents, abilities, opportunities that are given to us. It's what we do with them is what's important. So when we talk about accountability and judgment, so when the master came back, let's look at the response of the response of the third servant. So what does he start with? When we look at where he starts in verse 24, he says, "Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed." So what's he saying? Who's he blaming for his inactivity? He's blaming the master, right? Because I knew you to be a hard man. So he's blaming someone else. Do you know people who do that? Whoever makes a mistake. What would I always say to my kids when they say something, when they point? When you point one, what's pointing back at you? 3. So when I point the blame somewhere, it's always kind of coming back here. So it's easy to blame other people, isn't it? For whether it's a driver, whether it's whatever it might be, it's easy to blame someone else. That kind of has become our society. That's kind of where we look at where we are today, and we all expect someone else to do it. Don't we? Has anyone in here ever thought about running for office? I think Peter Engelbrecht has. I think he's talked about doing something on the local side. Should Christians not be in the political realm? Has anybody voted yet for Tuesday's primary? Does everybody know we have if you watch TV, you know we have a primary. But have you studied the facts? Well, have you studied the candidates? Do you know before Tuesday if you're going to vote, which if we look again at the third servant, what did he do? Did he vote? Nah. Did he complain? Yeah. He complained about where we are, but did he vote? Probably not. So we as Christians, 60 to 75%, we haven't voted. We've let things creep into our society. It's fearful. I'm a parent, I'm a grandparent. It's fearful as a grandparent, I've already raised my kids, what's happening in our school systems today. I mean, it's sad. It's sad to think about what's happening in our world when it comes to sexuality, meaning boy, girl, and those things. I mean, it's things that we wouldn't even comprehend that they're going to have to deal with in our school system. And our school system is what should have been there to help educate our children, and it's far from that today. And so as Americans, we need to wake up. I mean, we need to vote on Tuesday. You need to study the candidates. Now, you can't take all the things they say on their ad, their political ad, as gospel, but you at least have to study and pray about it. Because we're going to put somebody potentially in office who's going to go to the Senate, who's going to be involved in making laws and voting on and doing, allowing teachers to do what they do or schools to do what they do and keep parents out of the equation. I mean, that's happening in our world today. And we could sit here at Alkire Road in a comfortable, last Sunday was cold, hopefully it's not cold this Sunday, but we could sit here in this room and we could be comfortable with our lives. But the world around us is spinning out of control. So Christians, we have an opportunity. We have to vote. You have to study the issues, schools issues, all of those things. I mean, there's now parents getting involved in school board meetings. People are starting to stand up. I don't know whether they're Christians or not, but Christianity, we need to stand up. We need to take on the responsibility that's given to us. Because do I want to go before God and he says, did you vote and put that man in office? That basically says that you can't worship in church? No, Lord, I was busy. I was watching something or doing something. If enough of us watch something, do something, and we don't take part we get what we've got. I remember Tim made a comment in Bill's class, sometimes God lets bad people have bad leaders. If we allow that as Christians, if we allow a bad nation to have bad leaders, we get the results. Don?
I think a lot of this goes back to you talking about schools. You look at, they teach these children, you know, when they get into elementary school, these things, first, second, third graders, you know, these kids don't even know what's going on, and they're penetrating their minds with all this nonsense and garbage, and that just continues as they grow. You know, what they're getting in an educated, not college, maybe it's not supposed to be educated, but, and you know, their education.
Yeah.
And then, you know, they've got that in their minds, and the next generation, that's where I think we lose ground, because, you know, this is acceptable, you know, this generation moving up, you know, it's,
Sure.
you know,
Yeah. And what Don says is that he thinks a lot of it is education, and it's hard to generalize all education. Rachel's in here. I don't want to badmouth Rachel, but let's face it, that a lot of our children that are not in the proper environment have access to a lot of other information given to them beyond the parents' control. I mean, we send our kids to school, they're there longer than they are with us. Sure. Yeah. Well, and that's why literally parents have become involved in school boards because of what's being taught. You know, we didn't do that back when evolution was first brought into the school system. We didn't do that. We didn't fight it and do, and now that's gospel as far as education is in that regard. Paula?
Right, you know, when I was in school, they taught you fundamentals that you could use in life, that help you succeed in life and to get a good job. This criteria you're trying to teach kids now is not going to help them in any way succeed.
Yeah.
It's changing their whole outlook.
Yeah, and Paula says that it's obviously changed a lot since what we were taught, basic principles and things like that, and what other things are now being brought into school systems. Bill?
Yeah, what we've done in this day and age is we've gone from education to indoctrination.
Yeah, and what Bill said is that we've gone from education to indoctrination, and I don't want this class to be turned to that, but the point is, we need to study those things. I mean, we need to study what is being taught in our schools around us. You know, my grandkids go to but Donovan goes to a friendship fellowship, but every week they send out pictures of the kids. Half the time Donovan's not in them, but when I'm looking at these 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old kids, there's no racist in there. When you see these kids with Donovan with his arm around somebody, whether he's yellow, black, white, I mean, these kids don't know any of that at that age. When do they learn it? From the parents, maybe? From adults? From the system? The system tells them. So, I mean, when we think about, we're in a whole different world today than what I grew up in with Mayberry RFD and Andy Griffith's show and all those things, when basically the news was reported, just the news. They didn't do all the things that are there. But reality is, this is now the world that we live in. Can you see a time where we can't worship as we please? What happened with COVID? Don't go to church. Isn't that what they said? No mass gatherings. We go to sport events. Well, we couldn't even do that. But think about what happened with COVID. We saw a snapshot. So let's say that what David Horowitz wrote about is true. If there is a group trying to control Christianity, did it put a stop to Christianity? Temporarily. Luckily, I mean, when you think about, as luck would have it, we had already prepared to do streaming, so we had that in place. Somebody had already invented or come up with communion cups that you could take it home. Not that we couldn't have done that on our own, but we made it simple. But then the downside to that is how many people haven't come back to church? Because you know why? And I'm not calling them lazy, wicked, or like the slothful servant, but it's easier to stay at home. Recently, visiting somewhere else, when the preacher talked about that, he said probably, and again it's generality, probably the people who haven't come back, you probably didn't have them to begin with. Probably. They were here, but they weren't here. And when you think about that lazy servant in this parable, he was there, right? He received his talent. It's what he did with it. So we can use things out there as a crutch. We can use the easiness of watching, sitting in our bathrobe or whatever we might be looking like. Good thing it's cameras one way and not two ways, right? But so when we think about our responsibility, what I can do today, if we look at opportunities, first opportunity you could do right now is you can get updated, figure out who you're going to vote for, and on Tuesday you need to vote. And then you need to follow what happens in the realm of politics. You know, we're a small group, but if a small group and another small group and another small group band together, there's a lot of things that we could do. I deal with a lot of business people, and there's nobody I talk to in the business people that says, it's great. I love paying $5 a gallon for diesel fuel for their trucks. Or I love da-da-da-da. Or this is just great. It's just nobody. I mean, everybody's like we are. Not to just complain, but again, 60 to 75% of us are Christians in the United States. What have we done? We didn't do anything. And we let it happen. Any comments?
James 4:17, I sent the scripture that you that know to do good, do it not.
Okay. Judy said very quietly, James 4:17, he that knoweth to do a good and doeth not, that's sin. So we know we need to vote. We know we need to make our voice heard, whether it's school boards, business meetings, whatever you might be involved in. We have to take part. Mark?
You know, there's a misconception by a lot of religious people and a lot of just non-religious people that there's a division between church and state. That's a man-made tradition. Don't
Yeah.
find that in the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible teaches we're supposed to,
Yeah.
we're supposed to be out front.
Right. Right. Yeah, and what Mark talked about there is there's a lot of religious folk who thinks there's a division between church and state. You don't find that in the Bible. You don't find that in the Bible. Now, I remember years ago, Gaston Cogdell was a preacher at Clifton, and he was involved in that movement, and his point was he didn't want somebody leading the Lord's Prayer that doesn't belong. And it's like, that's not, because we allowed that to happen in the 70s, we've taken it away. And now we have football coaches get in trouble for saying prayer on the football field with their team. I mean, when we're called before the master and he says, what did you do to help stop what was happening? Now, it's hard to stop a snowball or avalanche when it happens, but yet one small voice can make a difference. One person can make a difference. All we have to do is make a difference in one person's life, change one child's life to make a difference. We have abilities, we have talents, we have to use them. Nancy.
You talk about the coach, you know, they was not praying. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I don't remember what state it was in. The whole town, when they told the coach he was there, they all got down on their knees and prayed.
Sure.
And I thought
That's community. That's because what happens is we use our voice this much. The one anti uses their voice this much, and they listen. When you look at the population and you look at numbers, the amount of people who are LGBTAs, whatever those all initials mean, gay, lesbians, trans, it's a small decimal of a percent of Americans. But yet look where we've basically changed our culture for these folks because they're the loud voice. Christians need to be the loud voice. Squeaky wheel. I'm that old too. Don says there's an old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But that's where we need to be as Christians. We need to let our voice be heard. Jesus Christ was one man, but look what he did. And he had he didn't have a big microphone and stage, and he did it by just one-on-one, speaking to crowds. Running out of time. But another thing that the wicked servant did is he excused his disobedience because he was afraid. He said, I was afraid, and went and hid. I was afraid. I couldn't stand before the school board and say that I want to let my teacher pray, or I don't want this teacher teaching my child about whether he's a boy or a girl. Don't be afraid. We have the verses that we read we're going to be, what we sow is what we reap. We're going to be held accountable for what we don't do as much as for what we do. Can't use those two words together, but so we're going to be held accountable for things that we don't do, and we're going to be rewarded for what we do. But our inability, I think this parable shows us that we will be called before our master, and we will have to give a reckoning for our inability as well as the sins that we've done. And James 4:17 tells us that if we know to do good, don't do it, that's sin. Any other questions or comments or points to be made before we hear the doorbell, which should be ringing any time? Wow. All right, thank you.